I would really love us to hear now from Karyn Lisignoli. Karyn.
I'm here to talk just very, very briefly about a campaign that's been launched that I'm a spokesperson for, and just to give a very brief overview of why I'm one of the spokespersons for that campaign. So the campaign is Respect My Sex If You Want My Vote Australia. So the website is respectmysexaustralia.org. And basically it's a campaign that's replicated on the Respect My Sex If You Want My Ex campaign that was launched by some very high profile women and female activists in the UK. And of course over there it's Respect My Sex If You Want My Ex, because they put an X in the ballot paper, where of course we use numbers, and hence the is Respect My Sex If You Want My Vote. So the whole campaign is, again, as the two previous speakers have alluded to, is about raising awareness of how the radical trans agenda has usurped and undermined long and hard fought for women's rights in most states and, of course, across Australia. So whether that's come from the basic, as we've heard now, the basic definition of women, which has been suddenly used no longer someone who is a biological female, an adult biological female, or an underage biological female, if we're talking about the definition of a girl, to someone who self-IDs as such, which unfortunately, as we have just realised, means that all of those hard fought for rights in order to develop female-only spaces, which of course is based on our biology. If we look at the long history and the long history of oppression and injustice that women have experienced in various forms across the world, and unfortunately for a lot of women in the developing world, still actually experience quite severe oppression and injustices as a result of the societies and the cultures that they live in. Fortunately, in the West, we've been campaigning, and of course, we've heard from people here as just some small examples of the areas in which we've been campaigning since, of course, decades and decades and decades, to ensure female-based rights, because it is our biology. It is the fact that women are physiologically and physically weaker than men. It is the fact that women menstruate and have child-rearing and pregnancy and other issues like that, which have put us in a far more physically vulnerable position to men, which has historically been one of the mechanisms that then has ensured that women have been locked out of a whole variety of other spaces, such as the political sphere, such as economic spheres, etc. So these very hard fought for rights, in which many of which have been established in the Western world, has now been usurped under this change within either the federal or state, either equality acts or discrimination acts, in order to allow self-ID rather than biological female as the definition of what a woman is. So the problem with this, as we've just said, under the banner of self-ID, we can get anyone who's genuinely suffering from body dysphoria, and of that population of people, only about 10% will actually have full gender reassignment surgery, aka have genital surgery. So of that percentage of the population who are genuine people with body dysphoria, who classify themselves as adults and who wish to live as a female, so trans-identified males, only 10% actually have physical surgery, full gender reassignment surgery, aka these are, as have been described by the rest of the panel, for all intentional purposes, very much biological males. Under this self-ID, we have that a population of people that can obviously then access women's spaces. We also have, as been described before, a whole pile of men, and again, there is various debates about what percentage of the population who identify as trans is this particular population. And that is men that suffer from a paraphilia, from a sexual kink, which is called autogynephilia. These are men who get sexually aroused at the thought of being seen as female. And therefore, these are the men who are then often aggressively wanting to encounter on lesbian spaces and things like that, and there's a very strong argument to suggest that this is the cohort of men who are very aggressively behind the entire radical trans agenda, because this is a movement of men driven by a sexual drive to occupy female spaces, because they, of course, get sexually aroused by doing so and by therefore being seen as a female. And there's no more better definition or better recognition of being female by then being able to access female-only spaces, which, as we've talked about here on the panel, is things like sports, it's particular sports, it's schools, it's change rooms, it's refuges, it's jails, and it's a whole pile of obviously other venues and spaces where women, as we say, have fought for and have the right to secure those spaces based on their biology. And the other person or the other group of people under the trans gender, when we allow self-ID, so we can have people with genuine body dysphoria, we can have people with autogynephilia, and we can also then have just any male predator who wants to access female. Our jails are filled, our criminal journals, our stories. We have many, many stories of the lengths that predatory males will go to in order to secure victims. So it is absolutely absurd to think that they wouldn't do something which is as basic as self-ID, that they do not have to take hormones, do not have to have surgery, do not have to do any of those things. And we know, unfortunately, as a result of the huge amount of young people who have gone through a transition process and are now detransitioning, who have talked about how easy it is to get that instantaneous recognition as being trans. So again, under the whole radical trans agenda, there is the entire other issue of what is happening to overwhelmingly vulnerable young girls with rapid onset gender dysphoria, a population of people. So again, if we just look at general body or / gender dysphoria, this is a population of people. And again, I'm sorry if I'm telling everybody how to suck eggs. I feel very much I'm probably doing so, given the wealth of knowledge of people on the panel and no doubt in the room. But people who've got body genuine dysphoria, if we have no intervention at all, if we just have a wait and see policy, research will show that 70 to 90% of those will end up just coming to being comfortable with their body and their gender, and a huge percentage of those will actually just be young gay people. And of course, a big percentage of, okay, so that's just a general issue. If those young people have some type of exploratory therapy as well, then often the numbers will edge up further towards 90%. So of a condition that used to overwhelmingly be male, that used to be held visible and available in a very small percentage of the population and would be there very long term, only about 10 to 20% would maintain that position into adulthood. This has now been hijacked into an affirmation model such that any young child who experiences that, so instead of the expectation that they would be between the 70 to 80 to 90%, that would just be, hey, cool, I'm fine with that. And then a percentage of which, again, a big percentage which would just be gay. We are instead affirming them as trans and pushing them on a affirmation model of which we are pushing them younger and younger, which by definition, we know that young people don't have the maturity, don't have their brains hardwired enough, don't have the neuroscience, don't have the physical capacity, emotional capacity in order to make these decisions, are being put on pre-puberty blockers, and then from that, an overwhelming percentage are going onto opposite sex hormones and then into transition, etc. And now we're getting the pipeline of enormous amounts of kids getting to that other end and detransitioning. It's overwhelmingly girls. It's exploded. It's come on very rapidly. It has all the absolute characteristics, and I'll stop talking about it because, again, it's just getting terribly boring, of a social contagion, which we all know that young girls developmentally are far more susceptible to that, particularly when we also discover that a big percentage of these young girls and these young kids, but again, overwhelmingly girls, have got autism, have got such things as anorexia or bulimia, have got severe depression and anxiety, have often come back from very traumatic dealing with other trauma and other experiences as well too. So AKA a group of kids that has obviously got some very complex issues, and it's highly likely that the gender dysphoria or the body dysphoria is the actual presentation of what is underneath a whole pile of really quite co-combining and more issues that what are called comorbidities, but basically means that obviously they kind of have a negative multiplication factor into each other. So again, I've segued down there, so excuse me for rambling a little bit, but Respect My Sex Australia is a campaign that is non-partisan, that's been very quickly pulled together and been taken off the campaign from the wonderful women over in the UK, which is designed to raise awareness. We just want lots of media attention. We want lots of people to know about this. We want people writing stories, etc., about it as well too. But the fundamental aim of the campaign is to raise awareness out in the community about what is actually happening under the transgender, because people don't know. People are busy. People don't know what's been happening in the refuges, in the jails, in a lot of the schools, in things like Girl Guides, and that's where I'm going to talk a little bit about my story. Girl Guides, the longest standing girls only girls development organisation, has also capitulated to this ideology with no consultation with the community, etc. So the idea of the Respect Myself, My Sex, If You Want My Vote campaign is to raise awareness under the community that all of these things are happening, all these rights, these rules have now been changed, and people first of all need to know about it. Thank heavens. I think it's horrific for the poor young girls that were competing against her, but thank heavens for Leah Thomas, because now the rest of the world are kind of going, you've got to be kidding me. You know, like again, as Sal Grover says, when we're being told to ignore the evidence of our eyes, when we've got what is very obviously a huge, massive female in a sport like swimming, you know what I mean? Like everyone's just kind of going, yeah, a huge, massive female, excuse me, a huge, massive male in a sport competing against smaller females. It's actually made it very obvious to a lot of people, because while people are busy, we all in many ways relate to sport. So the whole idea is to say, it's not just sport. It's not just elite sport. It's at community sport. It's in all these other areas. It's in girls' change rooms. It's in Girl Guides. It's in schools. It's in here, etc. Raise the awareness, then encourage people out there to actually raise these issues with their politicians. And you may have heard or may have seen certain aspects where people are doing things like, what is a woman, and asking politicians that. So it's that type of thing. And on the website, there's a series of different questions to ask, much more specifically about, are you comfortable with girls being with biological males in their change room, competing in sports with them, etc. And the third thing is, for the politicians, we want this to be big enough so that the politicians realise just how absurd this is and actually work to change the laws back. So in places like WA, where I am, they haven't changed the laws to recognise self-ID, not under the Equality Act. We have under a whole pile of other acts, but not actually fundamentally under the Equality Act. But in a lot of other places and in Australia, those changes have already been made to recognise self-ID. So that's the aim of the campaign. The reason why I'm a spokesperson is that in it, or for it, is because I've got a long experience of being a CEO in the charitable sector. I've seen a whole variety of what I see of very, very bad ideology and philosophy come through under critical social justice. And I think that's come all to a terribly big head with the trans agenda. I was working as a leadership mentor for a while, went back into the workforce to work for Girl Guides WA as a change agent. And I'm sorry, I haven't checked my time, so I don't know whether I'm thinking I'm probably getting close to 10, 15 minutes now, so I'll stop. I won't speak too much, but basically I was brought on as a change agent. I'd been there for 10 days. I'd made a number of changes. I literally reached out to Catherine, ironically, Catherine Deves on Twitter to develop a partnership with her and a connection with her. That got taken up by a small newspaper here out in Perth, which asked a series of questions, and within a matter of hours I was marched out the door with my little cardboard box and my lunch for the next week in it. So yes, and then I took that story public after Girl Guides refused to speak to me, and I said to them, there's a far bigger issue than this. There's a far bigger public relations issue. There's a huge issue here for girls and young women there's a huge issue when the rest of the world, because the trans issue has just got so absurd that people don't know what's going on. People are starting to realise what's going on. When there is, there's going to be a big backlash, and all those institutions that capitulated to it, aka such as Girl Guides WA, will then be basically in a hole. There will be quite a severe public backlash, but they weren't interested at all. So hence I took the story public, and as a result of that, and now as a part of this campaign. So I think that's neat.